Welcome to Inspired Changemakers, a podcast about all the amazing things people are doing to make the world a better place. This podcast is about creating change in the moments that inspired our guests to activate. My name is Julia Healey, and I'm the CEO of United Charitable. Stay tuned to be inspired. Well, Kristin, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You are definitely the definition of an inspired change maker, just personally here because you have inspired me to look at how we can change and how we can change my organization and all the different things. So I'm going to do your quick bio. Kristin Lytle is the CEO of the Leader's Edge and brings significant experience in talent assessment, leadership development, succession planning, and organizational design to the firm. Kristin has worked at the well-known companies including Vanguard, Kohler, Whirlpool, and Target. Was Target your favorite?
Target was my first.
Target was your first?
Yes. Oh, I could not wear red for years.
Really?
I was in the stores. Leadership 101.
Okay, well, I can't wait to get into that. She has held leadership roles in business operation and human resources in both domestic and global capacities throughout her career, and developed HR solutions that align with business priorities while enabling talent to unlock their full potential.
Mm-hmm. Sounds about right.
Sounds about right. Are you tired? Well, I had the pleasure of meeting you at the KPMG Executive Leadership Program for Women, starting off in...
It was October 13th, I do believe.
Okay. Get that memory. And right from the moment that I met you, I was like, that's my absolute first impression. And you gave me kind of one of the best little strategies of how to deal with moments or just moments. And it's your 3-3-3. Mm-hmm. Right? Are people going to remember this in 3 days? Are people going to remember this in 3 weeks? Are people going to remember this in 3 months?
Right. Or even still, if you make a mistake in a meeting, is anyone going to remember that in 3 hours?
Right.
Or are you the only one left thinking about it? Which 90% of the time, you're the only one still thinking about it.
And I could go through my life going, oh my God, I can't believe that interaction just happened. And are people going to remember that in 3 days? So that little bit of just nugget right there has significantly changed how I look at moments. But tell me, why leadership and why organizational change?
So it didn't start off that way.
Okay.
I started off with a degree in international business, marketing, and French. And I had this idea of wanting to work in these global markets. So rewinding a little bit, when I was in high school, I was a bit of, I wouldn't call myself a nerd because my grades weren't quite good enough to qualify for nerd status, but I was a bit of a geek, probably more. And I was on academic decathlon, mainly because my friends had joined it. Long and short, there was a topic called the global economy. Mm-hmm. And we got to learn about why did companies go into certain global markets, and even with Frito-Lay, what flavors of chips were in different countries and those sorts of things. And weird fact, I still take pictures of chips in every country I go to with all of what I consider to be the weird flavors, at least for me.
Right.
And I just found that fascinating. So I wanted to go into marketing because I wanted to know, why do people make the decisions they do, make the choices they do, what drives them. And when I graduated, it was the middle of an economic slowdown, and no one was hiring.
Yeah.
And in all candor, I went to Target because when I was at the Marquette University Career Fair, the line was long. And I figured everybody else must know something.
Right.
And so through that, I ended up getting into their store rotational program, ended up getting into HR.
Okay.
And then I saw the impact you can have as a leader and what you can enable via HR. Then fast forward, got into organizational development and organizational design. And I thought to myself, this is everything I love about HR and nothing I don't. To be perfectly honest, not as much of the performance management and discipline and those sorts of things. And I just thought, wow, I wish more people could have this sort of knowledge of how do you help people? How do you set up environments and leadership structures to ensure that leaders are essentially having the impact that they intend to have, and they have the skills and capabilities to do so as well.
Well, and that's huge with what you just said, because, part of the first meeting is we did an assessment, right? It was the Hogan assessment.
Yes, the Hogan Leader Focus Report.
And we get this whole list of things, of strengths that we're, where we are on the thing. And everybody, and I don't know if everybody does this, but I'm assuming most people do, look and go, am I bad? Am I bad
Yes.
at this? Oh my God, should I not be the leader? Like everybody goes and they use this and to judge themselves of whether they should be or should not be there. And what I liked about the program, and again, that whole day, was, well, how do you use these skills to lead?
Right.
And that's what I think your approach is, not trying to make people into something that they're not or something that somebody else tells them they should be,
Absolutely.
but using their natural strengths to
Yes.
help them lead.
Exactly. We do a lot of work at Leaders Edge where we assess executives. And I often will say to the executive when I'm debriefing them on their assessment of, it's not that I don't care, but I actually don't care what this report actually says.
Right.
What I care about is what we're going to do with it. Because we all have stuff.
Right.
Like nobody is perfect. And so we're all going to have things we're really good at. There's all going to be things that we overuse.
Yeah.
And there's all going to be things that we struggle with.
Right.
Question is, are you aware of it?
Right.
And then do you have internal, what I call tripwires, to ensure you know when you're kind of veering into one of those danger zones?
And so I came to you because I said, I'm like, look at my report. I'm power hungry. Like I was off the chart on the power one, and I was devastated by this because I don't want to be a dictator of a country. Do you know what I mean? I want to be.
That's not your goal?
It's not my goal. And then you go, no, it's okay. But look, you're altruistic, right? My altruistic was incredibly high too.
I think it was like a 99.
Yeah. And so you're like, no, it's okay. Use your power for good. I was like, oh, okay, that's good.
Yes, exactly. And that's the thing about assessments is they help us with insights, but like we have to know how to read them as well.
Yeah. And why the women focused?
Yes, so when I was looking at making this transition in my career to go into small business ownership, entrepreneurship, I did meet the owner at the time of Leaders Edge, and she had focused this business on women. And so that just really, truly spoke to me. It's been a track record for me throughout my entire career. Another fun fact is I'm the first ever national champion in speech and presentation from the state of Wisconsin via academic decathlon. But my speech, even when I was 17 years old, was about how are women portrayed in the media and body shaming and body images. And so it's been a theme throughout my life, essentially, to help women not feel as though they should be judged with the same mold of what we see in the media, or that we're just different in certain ways, that we are whole people. And so often with women, we are being cast in what's known as a leadership mold that may or may not be effective, but is much more cast with a male leadership perspective. And often we have to find different ways to navigate to ensure that we too are able to have fulfilling careers.
And I think we've talked about this before, but I thought that I was not a CEO material. You'll love this because I'm not a makeup person. Like, I don't wear a ton of makeup. It's not, like, my preferred method, I guess, of presenting myself. And I was like, well, I'm not, like, I honestly had that thought in my head because every woman CEO that I looked at was, like, the perfect example of their hair being blown out perfectly, the perfect makeup, the perfect suit. And I was like, no, that's not me. So maybe I'm not, CEO material. Mm-hmm. How do you help women get over that image, like that imposter syndrome with that?
Yeah, I would say first and foremost, we all could take a glamour shot. And we need to remember, we need to start looking into, what are the stories you're telling yourself?
Right.
And number one, usually when someone's on stage, they are looking their best, their sharpest. They've gotten their nails done, all those sorts of things.
Yeah.
So that's not always, it's a snapshot, not the movie.
Right.
And so helping people recognize that first and foremost.
Right.
And secondarily, as a leader, is more about what is the impact you're having. And if the impact you want to have is great, that's what matters. And we've talked about this in the past I have a firm belief we need more high integrity leaders in positions of power.
Right.
And so we have to make sure we're helping high integrity people endure in their careers, ensure that they're making it, and they aren't creating these narratives for themselves of, well, I'm a little bit more introverted, I don't like to network, so therefore I can't be a CEO.
Right.
I don't like to wear makeup.
Right.
Like when you say that out loud.
Oh, it's idiotic. Do you know what I mean? But it is something that I literally had to work through.
And so you have to wonder for yourself today.
Yeah.
What are the stories you're still telling yourself?
Oh.
And they seem intuitive and obvious, just as the makeup thing might have seemed 5-7 years ago.
Right.
And so what we have to do is find out what are those stories we've absorbed that we don't even question them anymore. And so that's what I like to do with women in particular, because we're pulling those out to say, is it true?
Right.
Okay, there was usually a grain of truth to it or those sorts of things. But at the same time, there are often stories that we took a glimmer of and then we made it our reality.
And what I think is so interesting about that is, do you think men struggle with the same type of thing in leadership?
I think men definitely have their own struggles within leadership. I think men do have certain struggles. I mean, there is definitely an archetype. Like, do you golf? Are you athletic? Are you
Right.
that? You know, there's a number of things as well. But I think the scrutiny on our physical selves as women is much higher.
Okay.
As well as the fact when it comes to leadership behaviors, we have much more of a double-edged sword.
Okay.
You know, it's you're not showing leadership perspectives, you're being bossy.
Right.
Right? It's
Yeah.
all of those sorts of things.
Difficult.
Or if a woman shows emotion, she's emotional. But if
Right.
a man shows emotion, he's passionate.
Right.
All of those sorts of things.
So for me, I have been told that I am difficult because I like things a certain way. And that has been hard for me to be like, to kind of own in that sense, because no, I'm not being difficult.
I have standards.
And I just expect you to rise, right? Like, I
Yes.
expect you to rise to those standards. And I wonder every once in a while if, like, would they say that to a man? Like, would you actually tell a man, like, hey, you're being difficult?
Probably not.
Probably not, right? So it just, and that's why I think this program with KPMG it's the first time I've ever done a women-only training.
Mm-hmm.
So there's how many of us? Like,
About 35 in the room.
There's 35 of us in the room, and we're really learning about the leadership perspective through really female empowerment.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to thank United Charitable for sponsoring today's Inspired Changemakers podcast. United Charitable is a national nonprofit that focuses on guiding you on your charitable journey. Whether you like to simply streamline your giving or you like to create your own charitable initiative, United Charitable has the knowledge and resources to support you. If you'd like to learn more, check out the link in our bio. I love everything that we're going through. But tell me your rise to CEO.
Sure. So I just want to go back just for a quick second,
Yeah.
though, because one of the things that ties in of what you were talking about is something we talked about on session 1.
Yeah.
And this is my personal rant about how we talk about confidence with women.
Okay.
And you know a little bit of this, but I'd like to share that it drives me nuts how we talk about confidence in the media, particularly in leadership development spaces, because we think you have to have confidence. You should have more confidence. Confidence. And the narrative almost becomes that if something doesn't work out, it might have been because you weren't confident enough. And you think about it, in reality, it's not as if once you gain confidence, you achieve it for life.
Right.
When you call it out, it's very obvious. And so I like for us to think about when it comes to confidence, and particularly for women, it will wax and wane.
Right.
It is going to change. And if you're ever doing anything new in your life, I sure as hope you are not super confident if it's your first time ever doing a particular task. But what we can have confidence in is what I like to call our traits. Because you can have task, which is like, do I know how to do this actual thing?
Right.
But do I have confidence in my traits?
Right.
Am I curious? Do I have grit?
Right.
Am I willing to bring other people on?
Right.
And I can say, like, I might not know how to do this yet, but I have confidence in my traits that I will not give up halfway through, or I'm going to involve the right people, or I'm not going to do anything too nuts. And that will see me through. But recognizing that just because there's a dip in confidence doesn't mean I'm not CEO or senior leadership material.
Well, that goes to the entire discussion that we had about me taking an opportunity to speak at the Super Bowl at the Women's Power Brunch. And I was offered this opportunity, and I was maybe not going to take it because I felt that, like, I'm not really on stage that much, like all of the things. And I was like, and we had an intense, not intense, but we had an intense conversation around it. And we were talking, and you were like, okay, just remember, it is okay to be nervous, but instead of saying, hey, you're nervous, say, I'm excited.
Right.
Changing the perspective, right, and you're like, okay, you're going to have to do it for, like you said, you're going to have to get on stage eventually sometime. Why not let it be the Super Bowl? I was like, so Kristin, like really the Super Bowl in front of 400 other women, like the vice president of the Raiders? Okay.
Because if you can do that, you can do anything.
Right. But that's exactly it, because we expect, I don't know, at least for myself, I expect myself to have all the answers all the time and just, because that's how I want to show up.
Right.
And you're right, having confidence in myself, and I believe this, I want to make people feel included and welcomed and valued. Mm-hmm. And I know that I can do that pretty much in any room that I walk in.
Yes.
I will find the most interesting thing about you. I will ask you a million questions on it. I will connect with you, and that will be the thing that I know you from, you know? So if I can lead with that, and what did I do on that stage? I led with my humor. I led with my personality. And I led with trying to make everybody feel included, and it worked out very well for me.
And think of the impact that had now. And the fact that you did not stop yourself with the stories you were telling yourself.
Right.
And you were able to translate I'm nervous to I'm excited, because, quick fact, our bodies know when we're lying.
Right.
So if we try to say I'm calm, your body knows you're lying, and it's not going to calm down. Come on. But if the hormones inside of us are the same for excited versus nervous, and we can believe it if we're excited. And you had a message to share.
Yeah.
And an impact to make. And you were genuinely excited to share that.
Well, not only that, it was really cool is I got a hype song to go on to what Eminem Lose Yourself, because that's like, do you know what I mean? Like, as soon as you hear, it was almost going to be Rocky, because that's the other, the Eagles fan, like that could have been the other. But like, this is more of like, I don't know, I went with Lose Yourself just because it says moments in there, and I'm hoping that my career is full of these moments where I push myself into places that I'm not necessarily the most comfortable, but a lot of growth comes from.
Absolutely.
So I'm hoping, it's not just with Rocky, it was just one fight.
Right.
And this Lose Yourself.
But weren't there like moments. 9 Rockies? Come on.
Yeah, but you didn't know that in the first one. But so, like, really, though, when you talk about this, how do you get yourself? Like, CEO is not an easy, you're now taking on a company, you're buying a company. Mm-hmm. How do you get yourself ready and prepared for that?
I'll admit, like, it's not linear. And very few things that are worth it in life are linear paths.
Why is that so hard for us to accept?
Because we want to control it. We want things to go the way we imagined it to be.
Yes.
And so even currently now, so I've owned this company for 60 days. I did have a transition period where I was learning a lot about how to run the business and such, but it's very different when you're the one, when it's on you. And on the days where I'm a little bit like, oh my gosh, not that I don't know what I'm doing, but like just very stressful or whatnot, I say to myself,
a lot to produce.
Did you think it was going to be easy? So just because it's proving to be somewhat hard on certain days doesn't mean I'm doing something wrong.
Right.
Because let's face it, running a business is not easy, and particularly not in the first 60 days, which is exactly where I am. And so to think otherwise, when you say it out loud, and I often find that if I can articulate something, if I can write it out, if I can just put it on either paper or say it out loud and articulate it correctly, then I can do something about it.
Right.
But if I'm letting it swirl around in my head as these kind of like threads of information that are never woven together, they don't have a resolution. Or they can't be called out for the kind of ludicrous nature that they are, some of these thoughts. And like, wait, hold on. Did I think this was going to be easy? No, okay.
So I think it was you that told me, but it could have been somebody else, is that they have like a fact file, right? Of like that you put stuff in that when you need to be reminded of your capabilities, you put it in your fact file, right? Yes. And so being in a charity and being the CEO of a charity, you get rejected a lot, right? People don't always want to donate money. I don't know if you've ever been solicited and you've ever said no, but it just happens, right? And that's part of this job. And it was so funny because I was so down one day that like people weren't taking their personal philanthropy seriously. And I went back to my 990 and I realized that year United Charitable brought in $18 million.
Palm.
And I go, here I am throwing myself this incredible pity party that maybe I don't know how to like talk to people about their philanthropy and get them inspired to give and create an impact plan and do all the things that that really makes an impact in this world. Maybe I'm not good at this. And you go back and you're like, oh, well, 18 million, that's not nothing.
Math is magical.
You're like, that's not nothing. Do you know what I mean?
Exactly.
And so it was really funny, but it is so important, right, to remind ourselves.
Exactly. That very few things are as permanent or as long-lasting as we think they are, and we need to look back at these files of like, wow, I did do that.
Right.
Wow. And I had a situation, I'm not going to lie, a number of years ago where I had a very challenging leader that was maybe not the epitome of leadership, we'll just say.
Right.
And I was really down on myself, and I thought, what do I even know what I'm doing, and am I competent? All these it was a very kind of moment in my career. And a former boss of mine set me up with an interview, and it was one of those recruiters who's really good. Like, you can't get much past her sort of a thing. And so I'm telling her what I've done in my current role and my previous roles and such, and she keeps going, wow, you did this by when? Huh. And then you had this result with that?
Yeah.
And all of a sudden I had this moment because I heard it from the recruiter. I do know what I'm doing.
Right.
Oh my gosh. And in reality, when I had that moment of like, maybe I do know what I'm doing, and maybe I'm not a complete loser, or all these sorts of things that we can, a negative leader and then our self-talk can get us into this.
Right.
And that was a moment where I thought, I don't want anyone to ever be so reliant on external validation, so that if they have a bad leader, I want them to have enough of scaffolding inside themselves to recognize, hold on, I might have made some mistakes, but I'm not operating in a vacuum here.
Right.
And perhaps this isn't the best situation for me.
Right.
But let's face it, this is one of my newer Lytleisms, as I call it. Toxic leaders give us tunnel vision.
Right.
And toxic situations give us tunnel vision.
Right.
Where we can't see that whole perspective. And sometimes the toxic leader is our own selves.
Right.
The own voices that we're bringing up. And so that's where you were getting probably that tunnel vision.
Yeah.
Of like, gosh, and everyone's saying no to me. And then when you open the perspective, broaden your horizon, 18 million.
And you're like, okay. You're like, it'll be all right.
Okay, yeah.
You're like, it'll be all right.
This might work out.
But I also think that as a woman, that I always kind of can, and I'm still struggling through this today, so I'll be honest about that, is it enough? And am I working hard enough? Is it enough? Is the constant script in my head? Mm-hmm. So what do you coach around that with helping people? And I don't know necessarily, it could be men too. So, but I'm just saying, like, how do you get people out of that mentality?
Often what can be helpful is if you think about it ahead of time, of what does good look like? Mm-hmm. Because when you're in the moment, you're always left guessing, is this good enough? Is this enough? Have I done enough? But if you can go back ahead of time and say, okay, here's what I want to be proud of this quarter. Here's what I want to be proud of this month. So there's that component of making sure you're not setting ridiculous bars in the moment, because that's where, again, where our brains will run away with us. But if you can go back to something and say like, oh, wow, yeah, I've accomplished this. I've accomplished everything I thought I was going to this month or this quarter.
Right.
Can help. But then the other thing is regarding, like, is it accomplishing the job? Am I able to bring in my quarterly, like that quarterly goal thing? But it's like, where's my point of diminishing return? And am I doing that to myself?
Right.
And recognizing it. But it's tough. It's tough because for years, and I believe in grit. I love grit. Don't get me. I mean, I was the grit queen. I've actually stopped letting myself read books about grit because, as I sometimes say, if I'm not like running on broken ankles, then I think I'm being weak and all this stuff. So I had to like cut that out because I can really get into that.
Yeah.
Grit is great, but for high achievers, it can be a little bit dangerous.
Right.
Because we will try to grit ourselves and make things happen and try to shape it. And again, going back to, we can't operate in vacuums. We can't do it all solo. We have to bring people along with us.
That was the hardest. I probably learned that lesson about 6 years ago. And that was the hardest thing for me to swallow. And it's the hardest, and I think when you're a leader and you really see the vision for your company, but you have to let other people lead.
Yes.
And you have to coach them around leading.
Mm-hmm.
And that has been such an interesting journey for me, because it's so different than when you're building something and you hire the front line and you train the front line and you're like, okay, this is great. But then when those people get promoted, right? And now you're teaching them how to lead.
Yes.
Like, that has been one of the hardest transitions, because I'm such a grit doer. Like, I don't know, you can't get those. Okay, I'll just fold the mail and do whatever I need to do.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what do you tell to lead?
And chances are no one can do the certain things as well as you, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
So it's
know.
Tiffany Dufu, who's a similar role. She had this great book, Drop the Ball.
Yeah.
She talks about this. And she says, listen, in my office, no one could write an appeal letter like I could.
Yeah.
And these appeal letters, I don't remember the exact numbers, but let's call it like $200-300
Yeah.
is what an appeal letter would bring in for her particular nonprofit.
Yeah.
She could do it better than anyone else.
Yeah.
And yet, when she was doing appeal letters, she was not going to the event to get the $20,000 donation.
Right.
And yet, third part, when her team wrote the appeal letter, it was not as good as hers, but it still got the $200.
Right.
So instead of looking at it as I got us this, like her that effort was not having any benefit for the organization.
Right.
So it's really recognizing they might not do it quite as well as I do, but is it good enough to get the thing done so I can spend my time in higher value activities?
Oh my God. Everybody needs to listen to this. Like, every single person, Kristin, that works anywhere needs to listen to this, because it's a prime example is as a leader, you want people to do, like, you're like, don't do what I do what I say, right? Like that. And I have an employee here that wants to get 100 on everything. I'm like, but it's a social media image, or it's not something that, like, we can get a 92%
Right.
and kill it.
Right.
And it's just so funny to train that and teach that and live that.
Exactly.
And it's not only just in business. And my trainer says it the same way. Like, okay, do you have 15 minutes to go for a walk? Take 3 15-minute walks throughout the day to just, like, it doesn't have to be this magical, perfect moment. Do you know what I mean? Where you have your platelet, like.
Yes. So this is actually something that I'm very passionate about, of working in little behaviors that help you. And it originated a number of years ago, and I was trying to re-roll out development plans at a particular organization.
Okay.
And I hate development plans. I hate filling them out. I think they're awful. I liken them to root canal. And I am a talent person, right?
Right. Like, this is
I think they're awful.
Yeah.
They're necessary because it forces you to really think about what it is you want to be working on.
Right.
But I was trying to roll it out again. I was like, how am I going to get like 20,000 people to want to fill out a blessed development plan when I don't even like doing it? So I was trying to figure out, how can we break it down into smaller things? So I think it's just too big. This is what we do to ourselves. We're like, oh my gosh, look at this huge task. We're just breaking it down.
Yeah.
So I started looking across different domains, different industries, and I found a physician who was able to attain behavior changes with his patients after a major health event.
Yeah.
Which is infamous. Like, heart attack patients don't want to change their lifestyle or their diet or stop smoking.
Yep. All
and
of
he
it.
was able to get change and sustain change with his patients. I'm like,
Okay.
what is he doing?
Right.
And it's Dr. Ranjan Chatterjee from the UK. He had a show in the UK called Doctor in the House on BBC and such. And he has a podcast now, and I'm a huge fan of his. But he's very big on these small changes. And so he gives this example of, listen, I love coffee. I make coffee every morning. I do not need to put a reminder in my phone to say, hey, make yourself your coffee this morning.
Right.
It's something I do.
Right.
And said, well, you know, while I'm making my coffee, what I do is I take 5 minutes, I do countertop push-ups. And he said, so there's a bit of strength training. And then when I'm making tea, I do some squat. Like, just kind of integrating it into the day. And that is how he's gotten this sustained change with his patients, versus saying, I'm going to go to the gym 3 days a week, or I'm going to work out with this, or I'm going to do all these things. Because the moment you get sick, the moment a kid gets sick, or the moment you have to travel, then you're like, well, it's all or nothing.
Right.
Versus saying, you know what, I can still do some countertop push-ups in my hotel bathroom.
Yeah. And I think that with what you're talking about and just the small habit changes when it comes to leadership, it's so incredibly important, in the sense that I have literally had to take myself out of the room because I am a very decisive person. So, like, if you look at the DISC profile, I think we said that, like, I'm a 99D. So if there is a decision in front of me, let's make it. Like, let's go. I love decision making, right? I always feel that I can make a different decision 20 minutes later. And like, I don't get any of that. Anyway, so I know that about myself. So I literally, even in like stupid stuff around like what they're going to order for lunch tomorrow, or, like I literally am like, I will have to walk out of the room and let them come to a consent, because then people start to rely on you.
Exactly.
To make all of the decision. And these habits of exactly what she just said. The habit is then I make every decision, from the type of paper towels we order and then about 6 years ago, I was like dropping the mic. I had to do an entire exercise with myself for 3 weeks. I did not make decisions. And at the time I was CFO, that a CFO wouldn't make.
Sounds like immersion therapy.
I know. It was the hardest because my team then had to figure out how and what the hierarchy was going to be for them to make decisions.
Right.
Right?
So I want to just jump in, because there's two things here that's so interesting. Number one is you're showing you got to a point where you had to do essentially, like, I talk about light switch versus dial.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
And you felt you reached that point, I got to turn off the light, versus doing the dial.
Yeah.
So there's that. And the dial is always easier on everyone than the light switch.
I was a new mom. I just didn't have I couldn't.
No, fair enough. Absolutely. But here's the thing that underpins it that is so impressive with you, and what I always say about, if there's two things I want from leaders.
Yeah.
Number one, be aware. Be aware of your impact, your emotional weight. If I could get all leaders I ever work with to be self-aware of the impact they have on others. And then the second would be self-regulation. And that's a fancy term for like getting yourself back together.
Yep.
And as you know, I'm originally from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I have my infamous example of when you go through security at Mitchell International Airport, once you get through, there's this little area with the benches for you. It's called the recombobulation zone.
Yeah.
And it makes us laugh. Like, we know in Milwaukee it's not a real word. We made it up. We were just trying to get people to smile.
Yeah.
But I think it's such an apt metaphor for leadership.
Yep.
Because so often we can get discombobulated throughout the day. And if we do not know how to get ourselves recombobulated, we're going to spread that to everyone around us.
That was also one of the best pieces of advice that you gave me early on, was if I'm not going to show up with the right mindset, reschedule, cancel. Because it's not fair to everyone else around me. And that's going to be leading my vision if I'm not showing up with the right mindset and the right vision. And it is, ready? It is okay.
Yes. Imagine that.
Imagine that.
The pressure we put on ourselves to be perfect. And we have to be able to discern the difference between, is it capability or capacity?
Right.
And so often, we might have the capacity to do something.
Yeah.
Or the capability to do something.
Of course.
But not the capacity. But then we beat ourselves up as if we didn't have the capability to begin with, when in reality it was a capacity factor.
Which, like, drop the mic, walk away. And then the coolest thing about this is that if it is a capacity thing, you get to hire people and build people and teach people how to then be capable of doing all new skills.
Yes. And they might be better at something than you were originally. And think about the bigger impact you get to have as an organization when it's not just you doing everything.
I would like to thank Athletes Charitable for sponsoring today's Inspired Changemakers podcast. Athletes Charitable offers a concierge membership service that provides the tools and resources to build a legacy through service. Our athlete-led team has the first-hand experience and expertise to provide hands-on support that simplifies the entire process for athletes and entertainers to reach their social entrepreneurship goals and create lasting impact in their communities. To learn more, check out the link in the bio.
This whole mentality, and again, I feel very lucky because my career has been just so interesting.
No.
Okay, sorry.
We talk about this,
I'm
Julia.
not lucky. I've worked hard.
You've worked hard and you've earned it. You might have had a few options where you were in the right place, but you were not lucky to have your career.
Right.
I can't help myself.
I know. I love it. But the places that I was in, the people that I was able to learn from, and I think this is a mindset, just like you said earlier, we are going to have bad leaders.
Yeah.
We can learn from them.
Yes.
We are going to have great leaders and great organizations and great situations, but everything is a learning moment.
Absolutely.
And how is that important to make sure that you know that there's opportunities in everything?
It's the recognizing, like, we can't control the situations we're in a lot of the time, but we can control how we react to it. It's very much so stoicism philosophy
Right.
On that one. But let's face it, in most organizations, your and mine, a little aside, 'cause we're both like small, medium-sized businesses, but in a lot of large organizations, you have what I call the boss lottery. You might join an organization to be with a certain leader, but within 18 months, one of you is going to rotate.
Right.
And then with, candidly, the amount of investment that goes into leadership development these days is kind of a boss lottery. And your odds are about the same as the lottery of getting a really great leader.
Right.
You're probably going to get an okay one with good intentions, but doesn't have a lot of skill set, and you might get a doozy.
Your Midwest terms, a doozy.
Well, yeah, I'm trying to wash my mouth.
I know, exactly. Because now you're in Philly, so now you know how we really talk. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah. But it's this, like, recognizing, am I controlling what I can control?
Right.
And I'm a big believer in having visual cues because it's so easy to get inside our heads.
Right.
And so when I've had those periods of time, I remind myself of things. I'll go back to my file of things I've done, or I have a thing in my phone. I have screenshots of texts or emails I've gotten, or whatever the case might be, called kind words. And so I can go back to, so I'm a big believer in those visual cues, but just saying, what is it I'm taking from this? And even when I was going through, like, my purchase process, and anyone who's been through this with a small business association, God love you, but government, I do have some feedback for you about your process. Because I was to the point where, like, do you need my childhood vaccination reports as well?
Right.
Come on.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is teaching me something. I don't know what. I don't like it.
Right.
But it's teaching me something.
Right.
And I don't know if I've completely learned what that lesson is yet.
Yeah.
But what it did show is I could once again get comfortable with being uncomfortable and endure when I had a vision for something.
And why do you think it's so important that companies invest in leadership training and leadership development?
Do they want to be profitable? In all candor. Because here's the thing. There was a study published last year by Forbes that showed 70% of workers believe that their boss has equal amount of impact on their mental health as their partner. More than their doctor or their therapist.
Oh my God, that's way too much.
Yes. And so you think about that, and then, to use your term, the ripple effect that has on individuals.
Yeah.
And you think about when you have a leader who doesn't know how to accept feedback.
Yep.
Or is not aware of their emotional wake.
Yep.
Think about how much that stifles
Oh.
the team, the innovation, the ideas, the willingness to admit mistakes that are all human things. All of that gets shut down.
Right.
And so, therefore, you're not going to come up with great new ideas. You're not going to be willing to share them. You're going to let problems fester. I used to have a senior leader I worked with, and he's a great, great leader. He's CEO of a large organization today. But he used to say, jokingly but seriously to his team, you bring me your problems early, they're our problems.
Yeah.
You bring me the problems late, they're your problems.
Right.
Like, I'm going to hold you accountable, but if you show me early, well, I'll help you out. We'll lean in, we'll figure it out. But when you have leaders who are unaware of their own emotional wake, of their own moods, all those sorts of things, and how to be setting clear visions, that's what leadership development helps people do, is understand, how do I not essentially stifle
Right.
the ideas and the capabilities of my team?
And what's so interesting is that I used to think leadership development was like a little bit like yoga breathing, like, or meditation.
Oh,
like,
amen.
Frou-frou. Like, do you know what I mean?
I was put in HR to begin with to round me out because I was too intense.
Right. So it took me a very long time to understand the benefits of leadership training in all aspects. Mm-hmm. So I run leadership programs for my junior staff. I run leadership programs for my new staff. For, again, my new managers, just me. I mean, I truly believe in leadership development. So for the people that don't think it's a real thing, tell me what you would suggest as an entry point into leadership development if you haven't done it before?
That's a great question. And so what I would ask them to think about, like as far as an entry point to start, I would start with more senior leaders because of, again, to use your term, the ripple effect that they have throughout the organization.
Correct.
But I would ask them to think about when they worked for a leader who was really great and how much harder did they work? How many more things did they produce? How many more results did they achieve? So there's a bit of that mentality shift. But I do very much so believe that when you have a senior leader that even makes moderate adjustments to their behaviors, the organization's going to feel it and notice it pretty quickly.
Right.
And then that will enable results to take place. But here's the other thing you have to think of is depending on the situation, I often would say, like, you never want your business development or your business capability to be hindered by a lack of talent readiness.
Oh, that's the worst.
Right?
Oh my God, that's the worst. And Kristin, it's happened to me more times than I would like to admit.
And so when you think about that, where you can't take advantage of an opportunity because you don't have the
right
talent
people.
ready,
Yeah.
or you might have someone, but it's way too much of a stretch for them to do it just yet,
Yeah.
you don't want to have to learn that lesson that way.
And you know, it's so funny because I would not say that that was real until I became higher up in the organization, and I can now see it so clearly. When you're like, oh, if we had the right person, that would have been easier, or we could have taken advantage of that, or that would have been different.
Absolutely.
And like that's the part where you're like, okay. And then I think the other thing that the last thing that I want us to discuss, because I know we're over time. The last, of course, did you not think we were going to be? The last thing I really want to discuss is really when you're talking about leadership. I really want you to just kind of hone in on the fact that you take your natural talent
Yes.
and enhance it.
Yes, absolutely. So here you enhance it and you don't focus as much. Like you need to mitigate things that aren't as
Right.
your strengths. So you need to make sure
Right.
they're not detriments.
Right.
But in reality, what you bring to the table as a leader is often so special and so unique, but often we don't recognize it. And there's a little bit of like, we tend, you know, my phrase that it's used in other contexts as well, but I like to say it's hard to read the ingredient label when you're inside the package.
Right.
And so sometimes we undervalue what we bring to the table and how unique and how different or how helpful it is. Because it comes naturally to us, we think it's not that big of a deal. And so we have to start to recognize through feedback and talking with people, because that's a critical component, and again, going back to self-awareness, both good and bad,
Right.
as a leader. We have to know what it is we bring to the table and what the team needs and appreciates for us so that we spend our time doing that versus folding the mail.
Right.
And doing what we can to for the organization, because that enables other people to be at their best as well. And then the final thing I'll say about that is, as a leader, there's this thing called the spotlight effect in psychology, where we often think people are watching us and noticing us all the time. And the truth is, not many people are. There's a little bit of a caveat to that when you're a leader.
Yeah.
You are getting watched slightly more
Yeah.
than the average person.
Yeah.
And so recognizing what's the example I'm setting?
Right.
And do I want my people beating themselves up all the time? No. So why would I role model that?
And you know, it's so funny because to give the example, like, you know, we can get a 90 on this exam. Like whatever we're doing, we do not need to spend an extra 4 hours to try to get 100. Like the 90 is going to suffice for what it is.
They're both, if a 90 is an A, that is still a 4.0.
I know.
Math is magical.
But to say that to myself,
Yep.
it is again, because leadership too, like if you think of it just like you said, is that perspective, would I want that for somebody else?
Right.
Would I want somebody else to feel that way about their job, their work, their anything at times, you know, because and that whole mentality that we do expect we expect everything to go exactly like we planned. We want to walk up that staircase.
Sorry, this is not the life I ordered.
Right? It's like, can I have the package A, please? That's what I picked. That's what I paid for.
And it had the gold border all around it.
It did, and everything was nicely typed and spaced, and you know.
The right font.
Exactly. You're like, why did I get package C this year? This is not what I ordered. But I love the fact that the Leader's Edge focuses on leadership and developing talent. I loved the fact that you have amazing coaches.
Yes.
And I've got to work with a lot of them at this point. And you have amazing coaches that really focus on taking the leader and enhancing us.
Exactly.
In the way that makes us feel comfortable and heard and validated. And so I have just enjoyed Leader's Edge, and thank you so much for coming on the podcast. You are definitely spent your life helping people change and become better. And you really, again, I admire you greatly. So thank you so much.
You make me better, Julia. So thank you.
Find Inspired Changemakers on Instagram, YouTube, and LinkedIn, and comment on all the awesome things you are doing to make this world a better place. Don't forget to subscribe.